What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 741. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from across the pond. Non-committal answer there, Ciro, in case I forgot where you live. He lives in Cornwall. I remember now. I know where it's at. It's Sierkovitz. Welcome back, Ciro. We're down to Luis Scott-Vargas today. His kids had a back-to-back snow days, actually, and it is an absolute zoo over at his place. So he said, why don't you and Ciro fly the ship for this week, and he'll be back next week. So no Luis this week, but Sierkovitz, welcome back on LR. It's always so great to have you on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in American geography by no stretch of imagination, but isn't like 20% of the days in a year in Dallas and then in Denver sort of like snow day?
I thought so. He says it's nicer there than it is here, and it doesn't snow as much as people think and all that. But I mean, they call it the Mile High City. It's literally in the mountains. Like, how the heck do they not just have snow all the time? And if they do, you know, most cities that get a ton of snow, they're prepared, right? They got the salt and the plows and whatever. But Luis said, no, and it must be horrible. Like, they must be getting so much snow if they're canceling the school. But yeah, but this will give us a chance, Ciro, to talk about a couple of topics that you and I have been throwing back and forth regarding play boosters and the number of playables and kind of the promises that were made when play boosters came out and how that's come to fruition. And then also, I went on a bit of a rant a few episodes ago about the format speed, but I figured I'd bring up that topic with you to kind of see where the trend line's going and what we can learn from the data regarding what I said on that. And then, of course, we also get to check in with you about what you think about the current format by doing a Crack-A-Pack. We've got a Patreon question of the week. We got it all this week on LR. First, we want to say thanks to each and every one of our patrons on Patreon. They call them members now. At any rate, thank you. We really appreciate you taking the time to support us on Patreon. It means the world to us. And it's the best way to directly support your favorite content creators. Sierkovitz has one. We do. You know, most people that do content these days have a Patreon set up because it is the way to allow people to keep making the thing that you want them to make by giving to them directly. You know, sponsored stuff is great, you know, all the little ways that you can do everything, but the best way is just to go directly to the source, and that's what you can do on Patreon. So thank you, everybody, for supporting us there. It's patreon.com/limited resources. We're also sponsored by Ultimate Guard, the best in the business. When we needed a sponsor, we actually approached them. Like, we were like, hey, we like what you're doing. We like your company, and we'd love to work with you. And it took a while to kind of sort out the details, but they did come on as a sponsor on the podcast, and we're really happy about it because we can confidently stand behind their products, right? If you've ever used their sleeves, we love the katanas, but they have others, and their deck boxes, their ways to organize all your cards and your decks and stuff like that. They are awesome. I mean, they are really next level. I remember when their stuff first hit the market, and most of the stuff on the market at that time was more about being like graphical, like it looked cool, but it was just sort of cheap plastic, or it was something that, you know, wasn't really meant to last for very long. And they really took a different approach to it and make really high quality, well thought out stuff that is built to last and protect your lists, your decks, your cards, and all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in checking out their product lineup, you can go to ultimateguard.com and you can buy any of their stuff from either your local game store or your favorite online retailer. Thank you very much, Ultimate Guard. We do appreciate it. Now, as part of being a patron of the show, you do get access to our Patreon feed, which has where we ask questions of our viewership, listenership, right? So, for example, you get to get access to the thread for Patreon question of the week. And this one comes from Germany. Have you ever lived in Germany, Ciro?
I technically was employed by a German company, but I lived in the Netherlands. But
okay. Yeah, I know you've lived in
account, so that counts as I'm almost German.
Yeah, there you go. I know you've lived a lot of different places in Europe before. I didn't know if Germany was one of the ones, but it sounds like 1 degree away by being employed by a German company. But this is from Florian Holl, and he says, "Hello, Marshall and Luis," in this case, Ciro. Huge fan of the show from Germany. Speaking, especially the set reviews are some of the best entertainment there is for me. That's awesome, Flo. Thank you. And because there aren't enough MTG players amongst my friends, we're often doing in-person drafts with 6 or sometimes even 4 players. I know that's not how you're supposed to draft, but what can you do? My question is, Do you have any particular tips for drafting in such small pods? Thank you so much. And he says, Liebe Grüße. Danke, Flo. What do you think, Circo? What are the pods like at your LGS? I know you, in fact, in this case, you very generously skipped F&M to come be with us on this one. What are the draft pods like? Do you always get 8?
I wouldn't skip if it was limited today, but it was Pioneer, so I said, okay, I can make an exception.
Fair. Well, we appreciate it.
We do sometimes get like 6-7 people pods. We don't run anything if it's under 6 people. We just skip. Sometimes you get 10 people pods or even like 12 people pods, and I hate that, honestly, because
you never
you can't
wheel
play
anything
with the wheel at all, and that removes a lot from the game. But you play what you have. I'd rather play
what you have or
pods,
run what you brung.
Run what you brung.
There you go.
I learned how to play limited because it was, late 90s, early 2000s in Poland. I could maybe afford 1 or 2 drafts per format. And that was it. So I played 1-2 drafts. And then maybe if we went to the big tournament, you had to, somehow from those 2 drafts manage to get enough knowledge so that you can be competitive.
Okay.
What I did with my brother is I played a lot of Solomon drafts. I think that they have a different name as well. There are different names.
There's Winchester.
Winchester, yeah, maybe that was Winchester nowadays. Then it was called Solomon draft. You just build like a tower of cards.
Yep.
And you put 4 cards on the table, open faced. First person picks 1 card, the other takes 2 next ones, and whatever is left over goes back to the first player. And I played with my brother like every day. We just like drew from our big box of random chaff commons. We just drew random cards. So it was like a first version of Cube Draft, maybe.
Yeah.
But it was not curated, definitely. The only curation was these were the chaff cards that we used as proxies or something. But because I played it a lot with him, because we played probably like 6 to 8 hours a day and not always constructed, sometimes the limited, we learned how to play limited and how to be flexible by playing those Winchester Solomon drafts. And I think that there's Winston draft, which is quite interesting, where you build bigger and bigger piles and someone in the end will go for the big pile of cards that are maybe weaker rather than 1 powerful cards because you need to make playables for the decks. These are quite cool formats. And I'm pretty sure that if you Google like formats that require fewer players, you might get something nicer. I think that honestly, if you're 4 only, just open a bit more packs and you can play a 2-headed sealed against each other in pairs. And it's also fun. And then maybe you can reshuffle those pools and try to play in different combination or something. So I think
that's a good idea. I think if you do get to 6 flow, I really like doing a team draft in that setting. It adds a completely different dynamic to it. And this is, of course, where you divide the teams. So there's actually 2 ways to do this, and it's really important which one you pick because it completely changes the draft dynamic, and you can tailor it to whichever you want. Luis really prefers doing it the latter way that I'm going to explain, but a lot of people like to do it the former. So if you do it the former, you just seat down randomly like normal, just wherever, and then you just draft your deck as normal. Because the way that you do it this way is that you don't know who's going to be on your team until the draft is over. And when it's over, you randomly assign 3 people to one team and 3 to the other. By the way that people normally do this is by taking like 3 of one basic land and 3 of the other basic land, shuffling them up and letting people just grab a card from there. So, we're on Team Islands. Okay, we're on Team Swamps. And you break up into your teams. From there, you build together. You don't combine the pools, but you can help the person build. You can say, I would cut that card, or, you can talk about what happened in the draft. You can say, hey, did I passed this really good white card to our buddy Bill. Did Bill pass it to you? No. Okay. Well, then we know that Bill has that. Bill's probably playing white or whatever. Right. And so you can sit down and go through that and sort of get your list together. And then you just play round robin. You play each person on their team once. And that will leave you with 9 total matches played. And that therefore the first team to get to 5 match wins the whole thing. And then if you want, you can put up the rares or whatever. Some people like to do that. Some people don't. It's a personal preference there. The other way to do it is to select the teams before the draft happens. And this might sound like a small difference, but it's really not. It completely changes how the draft plays out, because you can do this any number of ways. You could do it randomly. You also could draft, where you could have two people that are like, you get to pick one person, then you get to pick two people, and the last person goes to the other team. But that, depending on the group, can have some feel bad connotations. So sometimes people just go, let's just do it randomly. And then what you do is you sit A, B, A, B, A, B. So, every other person is on a different team rather than random. So when you sit down and draft and you open up your pack, whoever you're passing the pack to is on the other team, whether they're on your right or your left. And that means you got to be really cognizant of what you're shipping them, because if you open up a really great bomb in pack 3, if you're playing without knowing who's on your team, you can just take the card for your deck and ship the bomb, just like you would in a normal draft, where you're like, I'm not in red. I'm firmly in black-white. I don't have any fixing. I opened a sweet dragon that costs double red, but I can't take it. So I'm going to take a good removal spell here and I'll just move on with my life. That's how you would approach a draft normally. But in a team draft, you can't have that mentality. And so if you're doing teams after, you can just do that. You can just ship it along, because there's an equal chance that person's going to be on your team or their team, and you can just draft the best deck that you can. If you do teams before, you are trying to prevent your opposition from getting a good deck as much as you're trying to get a good deck yourself. And the end result of that is that it is a little more interesting during the draft portion, because literally know that you're passing to somebody who's not on your team. So there's a lot of information to be gained as a team. And also, your deck's going to end up a little worse usually. People are trying to prevent you from having a good deck, and you're trying to prevent them from having a good deck, and that usually has an effect on the overall power level of the decks in the end. So it's a little scrappier. It's a little more, okay, I'm going to splash this thing, or, scrap out that last playable or whatever. And that to me is perfect. You can do that in 6 or 8. 6 is the ideal number for that, because 8 actually gives you an even number of total matches played, so there can be ties, and then you have to decide how to break the tie. The most common way that I've seen is send forth a champion. Basically, each team gets to pick the players with the deck that they drafted that they think has the best chance. You pick that person silently, and then both present that, and then that person plays the match or even a game, depending on how much time you have, and that's how you're going to figure out who won the draft. But again, that's not a problem with 6-player. 4-player is kind of the worst. And I agree with what Sierko said. You don't want to play team draft. You don't really want to do a regular passing cards draft. So you're kind of forced to do something different. And I think sealed, especially if you aren't afraid to do 2-headed giant sealed, you can even get away with a couple fewer packs and still end up with 2 good decks out of it, or even 3 if you've got 6 people and you don't want to draft. So that's what I would do. I would definitely look into team draft. It has a totally different dynamic. And the more you do, the more you'll understand how much information you have about what your opponents are doing and how much you can influence what they're doing. And it's a really good way to get better as well. Thanks, Florian. We appreciate the question. Let's do a crack a pack.
Dankeschön, Florian.
Yeah, danke, Flo. Okay, let's do a crack a pack for murders, and we will see what you think of this format, Sirko. So our first card out, it's a foil. It's Rot Farm Mortipede.
Yeah, not a first pick, is it? I mean,
it
the
is
card
not.
is playable. I think that the more bite down on crime I have, the more likely I am willing to play it in the black-green.
But it's pretty bad. What about Rubble Belt Maverick?
I do like that card. Again, not a first pick material. It's quite essential in some decks, but I think it's actually playable in all green decks that want to be either aggressive or graveyard centric, which I don't think that there are other green decks in this format.
What about Magnifying Glass?
No.
Okay. So here's the inflection point of every pack one, pick one. Novice Inspector.
Yeah, it's
really great, but do you want to be in white,
Probably like what, 85% probability for me that I'm going to pick this card in the pack.
How do you feel about that?
I don't feel particularly bad.
Okay. I mean,
I don't mind.
It's a little boring, and it's putting you in a contested color.
Ultra powerful common cards. I don't mind that at all.
Okay. I mean, it's just a little boring, frankly, and it's also just in a hotly contested color. It's a great card. It performs extremely well in the format, especially at common. But I don't know. I mean, we are definitely at the point in the format where it's like, okay, if I'm going to pick one in Novice Inspector, I know I can make a deck around it, but I'm sort of at the mercy of the table if I end up, especially red-white, how many other people are going in it. If it's one, I'm good to go. If it's two, I can make a deck. If it's three other people, I'm kind of screwed,
But I mean, good part of the Novice Inspector is that it is actually very flexible. Every white combination will happily play it. It's just
white so overdrafted. Okay, somehow we have another Rubber Belt Maverick. Next one is Reasonable Doubt in blue.
I can see the merits of this card, especially when I'm short in 2-drops, but I'm not a particular fan of it.
Okay, what about, we got both of them somehow, Galvanize. We got Novice Inspector and Galvanize.
I mean, Novice Inspector is better by a large margin, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Galvanize is not even the best red common, I think. It's not even the shock. Second best red common, I think.
Yeah, I think you'd rather have Shock or Person of Interest over it. But
exactly.
But Novice Inspector, gives you flexibility and power, where Galvanize is powerful, but it's a lot more narrow. Next comment is Toxin Analysis.
I'm generally probably lower on this card than most people. Decks that I play that are black usually don't want to play it because 1 mana cost is not something I'm super interested in, because I want to have like those at least 4 mana spells in my graveyard for collecting evidence. And that puts it in a very awkward spot.
How much of a backflip would I have to do to have the job that you do in real life described this way?
I am pretty far, because that would require analytical chemistry, which I am absolutely atrocious at, and probably analytical biochemistry, which is even the more difficult version of it. I work with living things, thus I'd rather avoid toxins.
Okay. So
we do have people that do that for us, so I collaborate with some people who might do that kind of thing.
Well, you should give them one of these cards as a gift. Last comment is Slice from the Shadows.
This has weirdly similar problem that Toxin Analysis has, that it is a 1 mana card, and I'd rather. So, for example, I'd rather play the Rot Farm Mortipede and Bite Down on Crime in my deck and get my lifelink from casting the Bite Down on Crime cheaper and then getting like 10 life in 1 turn, which is actually something that will happen quite routinely when you play Bite Down on Crime. Then to play Slice from the Shadows, that I can kill something big and I can get like the disguised creature quite cheap and early. But in the end, it ends up in my graveyard being this 1 mana spell that I cannot really collect evidence for. And then sometimes being pretty awkward because it can be blown out by a trick. It probably is better in some kind of aggressive decks, and I don't play those very frequently. Yeah. And also, because it's a removal, it's being picked quite highly by people during the draft, which means that at the moment when I'm willing to pick it, I don't see it in the pack anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's a tough one. With the prevalence of combat tricks in the format, usually when you see an instant speed removal spell, you at least you get to factor in some amount of blowout potential, right? Of getting a 2-for-1 with it some percentage of the time. Most good players won't open the door for that lightly, but sometimes you can force them to, or if they get sloppy or if they're not such a great player, you can kind of get somebody. But even with the uncounterability part, I found just too often that like I just sorcery speed this thing anyway. It's just like I want to get your face down creature off the battlefield. I don't want to let you untap and have your mana have it flip face up and have it be too big. I don't want a combat trick to run into it. So it ends up being that the instant speed nature of it, which would normally be a pretty big benefit, is negated somewhat in this set.
Yeah, I think in instant speed it's much better as a sort of combat trick that you want to use offensively when opponent should be tapped and you should be untapped. Yes. But the problem is that it's not often that those aggressive black decks will come together, and because of that card is suffering a bit.
Yeah, well, and it's exactly what I said. I mean, in your scenario, you're using it on your turn or sorcery speed as well, so you're just not getting that big upside. Next up, cards like this are just like there were times when we would actually read cards like this and pay attention to them. It's Aftermath Analyst. That's the one in a green 1/3. And when it ETBs, you mill 3 cards and you can pay 3 and a G to sack it and return all land cards to, from your graveyard to the battlefield tap. That is a cool card, right? It's only 2 mana. It mills you to theoretically set up, synergies down the line. And then it even can be this like really cool ramp card that can, if you can dump a bunch of extra, I mean, you could get 4, 5, 6 lands off of this thing in some late game weirdo scenario. And like, in my experience, none of it matters.
I have a very different experience. I think that this card is definitely a card that you won't just put into any deck. And the worst thing with it is that it actually looks like a card that you want to put in a specific type of deck. It like looks like, I want to play this in my deck that I also plays like Chalk Outline and Insidious Roots. But I don't think that this is the case. It's actually, you probably want to avoid playing it in exactly those decks because it mills indiscriminately and you have a high chance of milling your key enchantment and they're ruining the only plan that you had for your deck. What it does pretty well is a deck that has, let's say, a couple of escape tunnels, 5 colors, maybe something like Niv Mizzet in it, maybe something like Doppelgang, and you play it on turn 2, hoping that you won't mill your bomb, which is a problem as well, but less of a problem than milling your Insidious Roots in a deck that was designed to work with Insidious Roots and has like 7 cards that only work when you have Insidious Roots, and then you mill it and there's nothing you can do. But hopefully not milling your bomb, and then you get 2 extra lands. On turn 4, what you do is you just chump with it and you sacrifice it before damage, and you untap on turn 5 with like 8 mana. And then we start doing stuff. So you just need to survive to that crucial turn 4 and hope for the best if you play it early. And in the late game,
I never knew you were such an
likely.
optimist, Circo. I didn't know that you had this like optimism streak in you where you talked about cards like Insidious Roots and Chalk Outline as if they were playable in the format, as if we could ever even consider responsibly playing them.
They're well playable. They're well playable.
They are horrible.
You should tune in to Sam Black's stream sometimes. You might see something. They're not great.
You cannot use Sam Black as the as the example. He can draft decks that nobody else can draft and play and win with, and everybody looks at it and goes, "That doesn't make any sense."
You need to know when to go for them, and people I think frequently go for them a bit too hooray optimistic and get burnt. And that's why, for example, this card has pretty bad stats, because I think that lots of the time it's played in the, I have Insidious Roots because I have like those 3 things that can get out of the graveyard, and that's not enough for making that card work, because it's just very bad when you don't activate like 4 times. And I think that lots of people,
that's one explanation.
But I'm pretty convinced that you can reliably draft good decks using those cards if you sit in the right lane, which will not be frequently. Aftermath Analyst is a different animal altogether, because this is more like a blue-green card. And blue-green is one of the most high win rate archetypes in the format, and not for complete and not accidentally. It's usually more open because people avoid blue-green because of historical issues with it. But it is pretty strong in this format, and Aftermath Analyst can do amazing things because it can both fix you, because if you have escape tunnels, it will bring them back, and you can get the second type of the basic that you need. It ramps you quite dramatically and quite aggressively. And decks with this Doppelgang, even you can play the thing like the World Seer Rage or something, where you can get back those escape tunnels, reactivate them. Bloomkins in those decks are just amazing because you can get a lot of forestage very quickly on the battlefield, and your Bloomkin becomes like a 7/7 quite rapidly. And you can play it. Most people will not kill that Analyst too early because there's just no point. And most of the time, you have enough defensive speed in those decks that you survive till turn 5, and on turn 5 you can do outrageous things when you have 8 mana or 7 mana or 6 mana even. 6 mana maybe not, but 7 mana. Already you can do some quite cool things.
Man, that's weird.
This format can easily have 5-color decks or 4-color decks, and you can put your Rakdos into those decks, even though you're playing blue-green, because you can easily splash it in.
Man, I feel like everything you're saying is what I hoped would be true about like cards like Aftermath Analyst, but just didn't come to fruition, or at least every time I've tried it, it's felt like mediocre at the best, I guess is what I would say. Like the dream, it is very difficult to make the dream come together when you're playing an understated 2-drop and then you have to spend 4 mana to not affect the board at all. Like,
I mean, is it understated? It's a 1/3. It's not aggressively statted, but it's statted correctly. It's a 4 stats for 2 mana with a really strong
but that doesn't
ability.
play well in the format. I'm saying like that's not.
It keeps you alive. It's
barely.
really hard for people, for people who play a bunch of 3 mana 2/2s with Ward. 1/3 stops them all day, and it's sometimes awkward for those decks to push through damage, and especially when they can play a trick to kill your analyst. Usually, you have 4 mana to sacrifice it and get lands on the battlefield.
I mean, that's not true, but.
Well, turn 3 they played the Disguised Creature, and turn 4 they untap. If you were on the play, you already have 4 mana.
Well, but you have to do it proactively, right? I mean, nobody's like, they're not ever going to play a trick into it, right? Or a removal spell into it is what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Like if you have the 4 mana just sitting there doing absolutely nothing, you're like, go ahead. They're not going to be like, all right, galvanize your analyst.
Yeah, no, I know, but I mean, what? Then you block, and then you block the creature.
Right, and that's what I'm saying.
You can do it now. You can always do it next turn if you have some kind of instant speed interaction.
It's true. I mean, I don't know. There's a site called 17 Lands. I don't know if you're familiar, but these cards do not perform in the aggregate. I recognize that doesn't mean that there's never a time, when you can make something like this work. But I mean, these build-arounds suck. They are not good. You have to work super, super hard or get really lucky to have them come together. If you open one of them and Novice Inspector and you don't take Novice Inspector, you are probably just making a huge mistake to your win rate.
No, don't get no.
Recognizing you can have fun. I get that.
I'm slamming Novice Inspector from this pack. I'm just saying that the Analyst is not an unplayable card. Just to give you my personal stats, in my last 20 drafts, I played green 17 times. And
out of how many?
Splashy. Like I guess like 5 of them were white-green sort of aggro, but the rest of them were just like weird green decks. My win rate is currently at 62%, which is pretty decent, I would say.
Okay.
And I don't have a problem. I 6-3 with blue-green. I 5-3 with the 5-color decks. And they are not tuned for pure aggression. And I think that at the same time in my last 20 drafts, I have 1 red-white deck.
And is that just personal preference, or is it being overdrafted? Like what explains that?
In my case, most of the time, it's the. By the way, can I use this for a soapbox?
Yo, yeah, go for it. Of course.
People, please, for the sake of me and me not drafting green for once, stop passing me pack 1, pick 7, a Killer Among Us, because I can't resist that. I'm not going to pass
awesome,
it.
though.
And it always pushes me into green, and that's why I always draft green in this format, because I always get past the bloody Killer Among Us at pick 7, pick 5, or whatever. And I can't say no to that card that
that card's good, though.
Ridiculous.
We'll see if they stop.
Enough of my soapbox.
Yeah.
But that's one of the reasons why I get that so late, because usually I will try. So my draft strategy is that I'm going to draft optimistically. So if I see a white-red card early in the pack, I'm going to pick it, because if white-red is open, I'm going to probably end up with a busted deck. Most of the time, it's not. And then usually a good color to pivot out of white-red is white-green or maybe green-red, because it's similar kind of strategy. But sometimes when you go early into green, you see that white or red is not so very much open. So you have to decide whether I'm going to go 5-color value pile or maybe one of those graveyard synergy decks if I see that black is really open and I also get past a couple of good cards. And that's how it worked for me in this format. And,
and
it
it's
worked
interesting.
fine. And you can make the games last.
Yeah, it's interesting because, Paul Cheon started his YouTube channel, right? And he was doing cube drafts for a while, but then when MKM came out, he switched over and, he'll do them for some amount of time and I'm sure he'll go back to cube or whatever. But his The last
I think he's
stretch,
back on the cube.
is he? Okay. The last stretch, though, he was doing like a run for rank number 1, right? To become Mythic 1. And, you know, for a good period of time, he's been, you know, I think the last video I watched was yesterday, maybe, or today. I can't remember, but he was like number 14. You know, he was in the 30s to 20s. Like he's been, you know, near that top of the realm. And, you know, you just don't see Aftermath Analyst or Insidious Roots or Chalk Outline on the battlefield in those at that level. You know, for the
but
for the
it's
people
also
that
the
are,
kind of a player that the kind of players that will grind the high mythic as a specific task-oriented people, and you will see those decks disproportionately more. Also, because if you are playing in the high mythic and you have a good record, you probably are going to play white-red, so they have to play this white-red, and it's sort of like self-fulfilling prophecy. Best of 1, I played some more best of 3 in this format, and it was quite refreshing because I could see a different dynamic of the game, and I actually enjoyed it. I'm now back on best of 1. But I still managed to play those slower decks. I don't play in high mythic because I usually don't have enough time in the format to get to mythic early enough to play in high mythic, because, you know, I will play 25 drafts a month, maybe 20, and people that grind will play 4 or 5 a day. So there's a difference.
I mean, I guess it's self-fulfilling to a point, but, you know, just looking at it more simply, I would say that the type of people who play at that level are the type of people who win a lot. I know that you can grind your way up to mythic just by kind of brute force, but, you know, if he's playing against the top 30 people that are, you know, at mythic on limited, you are not going to get to that level and stay there by just playing a lot, right? They are winning a lot. And so, you know, so when I look at that, I take away from that. These are the decks that are winning. These are the decks that the people, you know, if you filter on 17 lands by top players or whatever, are doing well with for whatever reason.
Yeah, but if you look at the top players' win rate data, okay, Boros has 62.5% win rate, but only top players. Yes, that's why it's so high. And then Selesnya has 62.2 and Simic has 61.7. There is not a big difference between those.
I'm not arguing against Simic. I think Simic is good. I don't think Aftermath Analyst, Insidious Roots, Chalk Outline.
But I told you, Aftermath Analyst is a Simic card.
I mean, I'm saying I don't think it's a good one. Like, I would much rather have, like, what's it called? The mole. Tunnel Tipster.
Oh yeah, Tunnel Tipster is a great card. I'm gonna say no.
But I'm saying that means that Aftermath Analyst isn't very good. Like, it is important for us to note when it can be good or where its home is. But if it's just automatically worse than Tunnel Tipster, like straight off the bat, it's like, well, cards like this can do some things, but they're not very good, right? Like, this is not a priority card that even for your Simic deck. Or is it? Like, that's what I'm putting on the table, you know.
It does have a solid win rate in this archetype, but nothing out of the ordinary. It's going to be a card you will want to pick at some stage.
Because I think the reason that I'm pestering you on this is because, you know, if you're a average LR listener and you get to draft a few times a week on Arena or something like that, you know, if you hear me and you talking about Aftermath Analyst as if it were, you know, quite strong or a card that you should be looking for, you know, you would be misled. Like, it is a narrow, and you know, you've made the case that it actually does have a home and it's decent in that home, and that's fine, but it's a pretty narrow card, right? Like, it's a, you know, like I said, it's just like Tunnel Tipster is just way better, just like to put it into context, you know.
I'm literally checking that.
Oh, good. I want to know.
So they are actually, if you look at the top players, in blue-green, Tunnel Tipster is 62.4% game in hand win rate in blue-green, and Aftermath Analyst has 62.0. So it's 0.4%.
So basically the same. Between them. Right. So that's if you're blue-green. Is there a way we can just compare the two cards for the top player? I'm sure you could look
no
it
problem.
up.
I just looked at blue-green because
what that gap would look like.
It's just going to be so much more scrolling.
Sorry. And I'm not,
Aftermath.
It's totally valid, you know, for you to say that because you did say you wanted it in blue-green.
In top players, 59.4 Aftermath Analyst, that's the win rate. in top players, which is okay. This is like top quarter of uncommons in the format. Yeah.
Okay.
Tunnel Tipster. Tunnel Tipster 60.3.
So again, within
percentage
range.
points difference in favor of Tunnel Tipster, but it's not like a chasm that you cannot bridge. I think that the card is much better than your perception of it is. And I think that part of it might be that I listened to that rant a couple of weeks ago. Was it a couple of weeks ago, I think? And I thought, this is the rant of someone that gave up on that, on trying those kinds of strategies, because I think that you convince yourself that they are not valid. And this was the time when I was playing in best of 3, and in best of 3 there were so many more things possible to be done.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about best of 3 though. I was talking about best of 1.
And I used that time when I played best of 3 to just try things with those cards, and I moved to best of 1, and I actually had much better results in best of 1 after moving from best of 3, just because I tried some things and I just honed how to use the analyst and how to make sure that I get the deck that it gets a chance. And I think it's possible to do. It does require some practice. It is harder, and sometimes you play those games against the red-white where they just open 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop on the job, and you're dead. And there's nothing you can do about it, and that's sad. But there are so many games when you can actually do something about it, because they don't have that perfect curve out, especially later in the format where red and white is contested much more severely.
Yeah. So the two things I would say is I was talking about best of 1, not best of 3. So that, because
no. But
the vast majority of people play best of 1.
Every time I'm talking about data, I'm talking about best of 1, because that's what majority of the players play.
Which is why my rant was aimed at that.
That sometimes shuffling between playing best of 1 and best of 3 gives you a slightly different perspective on the format, because
and that's cool.
You cannot abuse the pods as much in best of 3. The pods are much tighter in best of 3.
Right. And what I'm saying is, like, so if again, talking about best of 1, chalk outline 51.6 games in hand win rate right now. Does that mean it's impossible to draft a deck around it that is actually good? Of course not, right? You could somehow make that happen. There's always that thing, but it is not a good card in this format. Right? That is well below the 54.5 or whatever % threshold. And this is not for good players. This is just for all players. In other words,
that's a very important point, because if you look at the good players, you get 59% win rate, which is solid. It's the same as the Tunnel Tipster. It's the same as the Aftermath Analyst. It's not like the top uncommon, but it's a very playable. It's like the same level as Karlov Watchdog, or the same level as, Surveillance Monitor, which is, again, not a bad card at all in this format.
Right. So my point is that we're talking to the LR audience, not to the top players, right? So, and also, if the peak, that's the best that can be, that's a discerning player who knows when to put it in their deck and knows how to play it once it's in there, that is not good enough. Like, I would say that the good build around uncommons that we've had in the past, if built around properly, would be awesome win rate. Like, up there with the better rares in the set would be my guess. I've never looked to be sure, and we haven't had a build around that would meet that criteria, but I'm not going to build my whole deck around a card to get to 59% if I'm a good player and I know how to build it. I mean, that falls apart very quickly. Insidious Roots is the same thing. It's 51.4%. Like, these are not good cards. They're not worth putting in your deck unless you really know what you're doing. And then, even then, that isn't even the best card in your deck, right? It's not like you get some massive payoff. You get like a decent uncommon worth of a card out of it or something. That's not impressive, right? These build arounds should be like good rare quality, at least if you build around them properly, right? They should shine in your deck.
And I do have some ideas like why there are problems with this. I think that big issue is that both of those, they most likely require black to be playable. And I think that honestly, I'm usually praising the design team for what they're doing, because the sets are very playable, and I love MKM, but I still think that they are doing black dirty in the last years, because at the same time they purposefully weaken black creatures, because black creatures, well, the argument is always, oh, but black has the best removal, so the creatures will be weaker. But then removal set after set has been underperforming, because, okay, let's imagine a murder in this set. They're playing a Rubblebird Maverick on turn 1. Oh, what, am I going to murder it? It's already surveilled 1. If I kill it, they get an extra bonus, and it's just a 1/1 for 1. No, I'm not killing that. Then they play Disguise Creature. Okay, do I kill it? I have to pay 5 mana to do that.
Yeah.
Probably not then. Well, okay, I'll kill it when they flip it. And they flip it, and it's a Nervous Gardener, and all of a sudden they drew a land, and it's still a 2/2. Now I can kill it for 3 mana. Yay, they got a land. I'm killing like maybe half a creature. Right. Or they flipped it, and it's the 3/2 Gargoyle. Yeah, they tapped, gained tempo, and whatever, attacked me. Now I can maybe kill it. Still not good. So it does get this mediocre removal, and it does get this bad creatures. And I think that, so this is my example like of a creature I would like to see in this format, and I would like to see printed more like as a default. A creature that was nice in LCI in black decks, still not nice enough, because black was, well, the Jeskai colors were just too powerful. But the creature I liked was the 1/1 Death Toucher that milled you 2, because it had defensive speed, and at the same time the mill was the mechanic that was useful for the cards in this format. Why don't we make in this set a 3 mana 1/1 with Death Touch? When it ETBs, it's a Gravedigger. It is a bit of a pushed common, but yes, give black those pushed commons. It gets the card leaves the graveyard synergies, so you can actually get more of those. Because problem with those chalk outline decks is that sometimes, what do I remove from my graveyard? There's not so much that I can do. This would sort of be this in the later game. I play this 3 mana 1/1 Death Toucher that will be good defensive speed. It gets me back something else. It triggers my chalk outline, and the engine is rolling. Yeah, much better thing. And a couple of those like better creatures. Or for example, if you build that some of the black archetypes are aggressive, like red black and white black should be aggressive in this format, you can't just make only defensive speed creatures in black, because how am I going to build white, black, and red, black? And we're going to go to that in a second, because I have the data to show that actually white, black, if it comes together and is aggressive, is a very strong archetype, and so is red, black. It's just that they don't come together so often, because you need to have so much white and so much red in those decks to make them super aggressive. And black doesn't contribute much, because it contributes removal, which is bad, and because it doesn't align with the creatures that you have to play it against. And creatures that are just not aggressive enough and bad rate. And that, if that continues like that, I mean, obviously black will always be the pariah color, because removal is useless, and the creatures it gets have to be weaker, because the argument of the good removal stops from having good creatures. So that's my rant, if you like.
Okay, that's good stuff. Yeah, and we've definitely seen that removal across the board has become less valuable over time, right? Like, so many creatures have the ability to do what you described, either on entering the battlefield or in this set on being flip face up, that, it does feel like if the name of the game is to try to 1-for-1 with your opponent, which for a long time it was about conserving that removal for the correct targets and that kind of stuff. It doesn't really seem like it's much about that anymore. So black would suffer across the board. And then, as you described, even some of the cards that used to be really, really good, like Murder, just don't hold up. Let's finish off this crack-a-pack.
When we go back to the point that you made about the LR audience versus the top grinders, also, even if black removal would be good, this would never be a strategy that those top mythic players would be able to abuse, because black removal is, independently if it's good or bad, it's going to be picked very highly, because
yes, you're right.
Red philosophy is still applying, and people draft. Murder is probably still one of the cards with the one of the lowest alpha, which means it's picked very early in the draft. I'm just going to check.
I'm curious.
So it makes you think, okay, but Murder is still in top 10 of the cards in the format in terms of how highly it's picked.
And it underperforms.
By far the weakest of the cards in that top 10, maybe together with the Market Watch Phantom.
Okay. That's interesting.
There you go.
Yeah, Flyer's still there. Let's finish off this Cracker Pack and we can get into that detail. So there's Aftermath Analyst.
But we're still in the Cracker Pack.
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually really like to use the Cracker Packs to spark discussion. You know, especially when we have a guest on, I'll always like give a bunch of extra rope to that. For Luis and I, you know, we kind of solidify where we stand on stuff, go through the Cracker Pack for any differences, and then get into the topic. But this is always a really good jumping off point. And it was here too.
We're still on Novice Inspector, by the way.
Oh yes, we are. Next is Case of the Filched Falcon.
I like this card. I never get into red blue, which I think this card should be played in, because I never see it open and it's so uncommon dependent. But I would like to see it like pick 6 and then I get like the signal that maybe the blue red is open. I'm not gonna first pick it because the risk of that is too high.
Okay. What about Fester Leech?
I love that card again.
That seems like a very Sierkovitz card to
Analyst. Me. This is the card that looks like it would play well with the chalk outline, but it's actually very bad to play with the chalk outline. Or maybe not very bad, but it's can be dangerous to play with the chalk outline and Fester Leech in the same deck. You want to play Gorehounds in those decks.
Okay.
But there are some decks that will be black-green value piles that base on collecting evidence and not necessarily want to do any detectives or plants. And Fester Leech is really good in those because it combines good blocker with good attacker. So it's a flexible mid-range card, and the stats on it are decent.
And our rare, it's Niv Mizzet.
So
take Niv Mizzet, wheel the analyst.
Niv Mizzet is not bad at all. I mean, so I just did every set. I do the. We don't do the set review, but we write down all our grades. Me and Corticols, and then. After like 2 weeks or 3 weeks of the format, we go back to our set reviews and then we look at where we were wrong and we focus on where we got it wrong. And then this set, one of the biggest mistakes we both made was underestimating how good Niv Mizzet is going to be. We put it like, you know, maybe a C-, D+ something card, and it was much, much better than that. It's like a B- level card, which means it's going to be good. If you build the deck around it. The problem is you need to build the deck around it. Most of the time, you want to have it as a reward that you're in the right lane rather than a reason to be in it, if you get my meaning. So I wouldn't pick it here. I would pick Novice Inspector.
Okay.
But if I was in a draft where I have like maybe a Nervous Gardener and an Escape Tunnel and maybe a couple of those multicolor cards, and I'm not like stuck in one color per combination, and I see Niv Mizzet, I will happily pick it and start building more around it. And then, you know, it opens the colorless case maybe or something like that.
But the commitment's a little much for a pack one, pick one.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you feel like it, I highly recommend it. I generally highly recommend it. If you feel like building around some rare that you never opened and you want to try it, first pick it and see where it goes. Worst case scenario, you lose 1,250 gems or something. That's the worst case scenario. And maybe it's going to be a good case scenario where you get a free draft and you played with the card that you wanted to play. It's just like, gems are important, and I'm not going to tell that economic aspect of Arena is not an issue ever. But in the end, we play this game to have fun, and I think that people should try to have a bit more fun in Limited and try wacky things once in a while. You don't have to do it every draft, but once in a while you can, and opening Niv Mizzet is maybe one of those situations when you can. When
you can try to give yourself the green light to do something crazy. Okay, so do you want to jump into the play booster discussion, or did you want to touch on what you just touched on near the end of that Cracker Pack there? Where do you want to start?
We can jump into because I bashed the design team for the black common creatures. So maybe we can go into the play booster design so I can actually praise the design team for something that I think that they did well, actually.
Yeah, so there was a big change, not that long ago, where the structure of booster pack changed. And that's the first time that's happened meaningfully, really kind of ever since we've been playing Limited. And it's, there was definitely people that were worried about it. There were some concerns going in What were those concerns? What were you hearing? What were you thinking about when you saw how the play boosters are structured?
Sorry, brain dead.
It's okay.
No, I was trying to see where Jeff is putting the. So biggest change with the play boosters and the structure that they have. Yep, that's the question.
That's it. That's right.
That I overslept when you were talking. I was expecting you to go for 2 more minutes. Biggest difference is that you get more rares per pack. And there is average, it's 1.41 rares. That's what Mark Rosewater said. Mm-hmm. And that's what I calculated from the draft data. So 1.41 rares per pack.
And what were the concerns, though, about the play boosters when they were announced? Because I know that, you and some people in the draft community were kind of like, wait a minute, like, are we going to get enough playables, or what was on their mind?
I was quite comfortable and chill because play booster is not anything new, really. March of the Machine had almost exactly the same structure as the play booster does. And it had 1.4 rares. It had 2.25 of each common, just like it has right now, instead of 2.4 of each common. So that was tested there already. Mm-hmm. And the same number of uncommons. So basically what we're playing right now is March of the Machine was the beta test. And this is like March of the Machine was alpha test. This is maybe a beta test. And then they're going to develop from there. But the difference between March of the Machine and this set is that there is one card less in a booster. And that can be big. Now, the Wizards said that to accommodate for cutting that one card, they shift the balance. So instead of having 100 commons in the set, they have now 80 commons. And instead of having 80 uncommons, they have 100 uncommons. And what they said that they're going to do at the same time is that they were going to cut some of those commons that are maybe like sideboard card grade. And they're not going to do them anymore at all. They're going to either convert them into creatures. So you won't have like maybe a plummet effect, but maybe you'll have a creature that has a plummet built in. Okay. Because you can always play it because it's always a creature on the base. So even if you don't find a target and say, well, whatever, I didn't find a target, I still play like a 3-mana 3/2 or something. Mm-hmm. Or they will move those cards to the higher rarity, mainly into uncommon. So you won't be flooded with like 7 disenchants per draft because you wouldn't be able to play them. And then this will reduce the probability of you not getting enough playables for your actual deck.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's what they announced. That's what Mark Rosewater had this big article on nuts and bolts, and that goes deep into the design of the booster. It's actually worth reading if you are deeply entrenched like I am. You have to probably read it. But it's just interesting because we always talk about this cookie cutter design of the sets where there is a 2-drop with something, and then and actually he confirms that, and he tells you exactly how that cookie cutter looks like. So there will always be like 2.5 common blue creatures with flying in every set, and they will change some parameters, turn the knobs here and there, but it's going to be 2.5 flyers, and that's it. And there is no guaranteed 1-drop in blue, but there used to be, and he's writing about all those little things, so you can actually see how the Sausage Factory operates. But what he wrote there was exactly this: fewer bad commons, so you will truncate, but you will truncate only the ones that are bad. And of course, this is something that when you have data, you can test. And of course, because I like data, I did test that in a way, and I made those. I made this thread about it. That basically the hypothesis is that if they did what they promised in this set, it would mean that the fraction of the cards that have a low grade or low win rate, and is a common, will be smaller than in the other set. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. So in most sets around, now I have to find the graph from the thread somewhere.
The D plus grades of lower by rarity.
Yeah, that's the one. Does Jeff have the link to it to show the graph maybe?
Yeah, I have the link. I'll throw it in for you. And then Jeff, if you can put it up on the screen for our viewers, that would be cool. There's the link to the thread.
There is my thread there.
Yes.
That's the problem when you make those threads. You don't bookmark them because you
think
made
that
you might find them.
Yeah.
And then you realize how much random spam you produce every day and you cannot scroll down to them.
Content creator life.
Yes, it's constant source of entertainment. But most of the sets in the last couple of years, they had around 45% of the cards with the... So, by the way, I'm talking D plus grades or lower, but this is my scale of grades.
Okay.
It's not based on, D plus is the card that I don't want in my deck. No, it's based on win rate. I made specific brackets to grade the cards, and then I made them in such a way that I also can compare grades between different sets 1-to-1 because I did some mathematical thingies. And if you put the link to the thread, people can figure it out and get the link to the article and describes the scale and whatnot.
Okay, yeah, and that'll be in the show notes.
Particular win rate that it has to be below. And normally around 40% of those cards in the set, 40 to 45% of the cards with grade D plus or lower in the set are commons. And when you look at the MKM, only 27% of those cards with the D plus grade or lower are commons. And normally around 30% of those cards with the D plus grade or lower are uncommon, and it's 48% in this set.
Wow, that's a big difference.
There is a big flip. And of course, part of that flip is because there's more uncommons and there's fewer commons. But even if you account for that change, it still is under what you would expect. So not only they trimmed as many as you would expect just by having fewer commons in the set, but also some extra. So they really went for it. And it looks like the design principle that Mark Rosewater was promising is delivered in this set. So yeah, kudos to the design team for that. And hopefully it will stick. Of course, I'm going to test it in the next set and see if that was a fluke or if it's a trend, actually.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, we talked about it a lot on the show as well about that cookie cutter matrix spreadsheet design, however you want to call it, where there's these check boxes seemingly not for every card, right? But just that there's threads between sets that you can kind of get a sense that, that's filling that particular space and that one's filling that space. And it doesn't feel like every card. It feels like, I don't know, 30 or 40% of them or something like that. I just off the top of my head that you see not every set, but like that you can draw a line from one set to the next, or maybe it skips one, but then it's back again, that type of thing where it's filled in. But that isn't necessarily meant to be a knock, right? We also have noticed that over the past, say, 3 years or so, that the sets are remarkably consistent and good. Right. So like we just had this run of like A's and B's that we had never had like that before, where it was like, wow, like these are just like, they are just on a real roll where every set seems to, not be wildly out of whack and really start to kind of get fun. Now, my personal theory is that they're on a little bit too much cruise control with that. And that's why we've seen the thing that I ranted about a few weeks ago, where the sets are maybe getting a little faster. There's this emphasis on the one drops. There's, it feels to me that at least in broad strokes that these cool build arounds are being squeezed out, by these more assertive. I don't want to say faster. It is correct to say faster, but I keep going back to the last time we had you on Circo where you broke down that faster doesn't necessarily mean aggressive, right? I think that when people, when they hear me say faster format, they do translate that to mean like, quick, aggressive combat tricks, whatever. But you broke down 2 or 3 different ways that a format can express itself as a lower total turns to take it, but that aren't necessarily based just on, creature aggression or whatever. But I mean it in the way that you broke it down, where it's faster, it's more, things happen quicker, the game ends sooner, and there is an emphasis put on primarily affecting the board. It doesn't necessarily need to be like swarms of small creatures attacking and getting pumped, but where you have to be doing stuff. And if you're not, You can, right? Like, you know, what you said at the end of the Crack-A-Pack. Look, you think people should have a bit more fun with it. And even if it means giving up a little bit of win rate here and there, you know, go for it. It's about fun, right? I think that's a perfectly valid stance to have. You know, we try to speak to people who are prioritizing win rate on some level, but like, look, if you watch me draft, if you watch Luis draft, you'll see that we do what you're saying, right? Like, we're not crazy. You know, we don't want to, you know, go off the map with it and try to build like crazy weird decks that just never work. But like, I'm down to take a build around or a, you know, a Niv Mizzet or something crazy like that and try to go for it. You know, the threshold for me that the sets haven't been meeting. And again, going back to what I was saying is I assume this is a result of the more fill in the blank style of set design. I don't know that it is. It's just, you know, because that's just my assumption from the outside. But, you know, for me is I don't want to feel kind of silly or stupid for taking one of those cards, right? I don't want to feel like, oh, I'm going to make this analyst work and I'm going to try to wheel Niv Mizzet. And you know, if I can pick up, you know, like the build arounds we talked about were kind of the two most promising, you know, Chalk Outline and Insidious Roots. If I can make these go, I'm going to have this like sweet and powerful deck. Even if I recognize I'm giving up something by not just taking the Novice Inspector and kind of going one of these more traditional routes, my threshold is I don't want to feel silly. Like, I don't want to feel like, okay, dude. Okay, dude. You know, you're really going for it, buddy. You're trying real hard. You know, I will give up some amount of win rate, but I like you said, I don't want to feel like a buffoon on it. And my assumption, though, again, it may not be correct, is that at least part of this is as a result of the more streamlined design process that did bring us a lot of consistency, many very good sets in a row. But now I think we're starting to see what happens if that train starts to roll by itself a little bit. And also things maybe a little too much the same, right? Maybe a little too much of that consistency where, you know, we don't want a bad set to break up the consistency, but we, you know, something that feels different when you draft it would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that there's plenty of things that are overlapping and on top of each other there. And I think that there should be two-tier system of pods in best of one. Mm-hmm. And that would fix quite a lot of problem. I'm not saying that you should have like, I'm not saying that you should have like too much granularity in there, but I think that putting bronze, silver, and gold in one set of pods and platinum, diamond, and mythic into another set of pods separate from each other would be maybe beneficial, because you will get fewer of those situations when you are put in the pod and you just like week 3 of the format and you get like a sick, busted Boros deck because no one is interested in drafting red or white. Mm-hmm. And 5 people are fighting over black and ending 0-3. And those do happen. And the problem, of course, in best of one is that if someone gets the busted rare like that, they'll play at least 7, if not 8, 9 games. And if someone has a weak deck, they will play 3 games or maybe 2 and a drop. Mm-hmm. And so you will frequently bump into those decks that play 9 games because they play more games. So you're more likely to play them. And that creates those feel bad situations when you feel like an idiot for playing a more grindy, dirty deck, and you're playing against those decks from a completely different level of a pod where they could get whatever they want, pick by hand, and you know, custom pick the card because, now I'm going to pick Fast Bother because I need a mass pump effect rather than this Dog Walker because I already have 4 of them. Yeah,
totally. I've played against a lot of those decks. One of the things that has come up as a result of all of this too has been the format speed, which again was kind of the basis of what I was ranting about. But one of the things that I brought up and it has really stood out to me that I wanted your take on, because, and I mentioned this when I ranted as well, is that there is something subjective about speed of the format, right? You will have people that prefer quicker formats, whether they're more aggressive or express themselves in the ways that you described when you came on, they don't mind it. In fact, they might even like it. They might just think this is just better. Like I can just play quicker games and I can play more Magic and volume in that way. There's a little bit more of a cynical viewpoint on it as well, that I don't really buy, but that, the faster the games go, the quicker you reload again and play more on Arena, and therefore Wizards makes more money off of it. Again, I'm not.
Yeah,
I don't think they would shoot themselves in the foot.
Like a large portion of people are chaining drafts in a day. I mean, I'm going to play one draft in a day, and I'm quite an invested player. I'm playing one. It depends if I go 0-3 or 7-2.
Totally. I don't buy that. I also don't think that they would be so short-sighted to try to trim something that, cut that close. I just can't imagine that really moves the needle, especially if it would be perceived as making the product a little bit worse. There's just no way that they're doing it. So I don't buy that. I don't
think that they're so cunning.
Yeah, I just don't. I also don't. I don't think it's easy to pick how fast formats are. Like, I don't think you can just say, we're going to go for, an 8.7 average turn. Like, they can't do that. These are really complicated things.
This doesn't really relate to the how long you play, because those games end quicker, but those turns are packed with action.
True, totally.
I played Khans of Tarkir, and you just play this vanilla creature or whatever. And you don't have 15 triggers going off whenever you play anything.
Right.
That takes much longer time, I think, in terms of minutes.
So
I don't have the data for that to back it up, but that's just my feeling about it.
No, totally. And mine too. And that is just kind of obviously nonsense. But but there is a subjective component to it. But I really do find it interesting about the game win rate on the play stuff that I brought up. And I wanted to get your take on it as well, because, if you look at it, it is kind of alarming. Like, to me, this does indicate something systemic, like, again, with the, cookie cutter, however you want to put it, style, that maybe there needs to be some knobs with that they can change. Because, I looked it up today, and I did it when I did the rant too. But, if you look, and by the way, the reason that I'm putting this in context is because this number is universally thought to be worse the higher it gets. The more, and by the way, just to explain it real quick, in case you don't know game win rate on the play, it's, how much better are you for having won the die roll? What is your game win rate by being on the play versus being on the draw? And you just, take the numbers from people who won the die roll and see how much they win in the aggregate, just big picture. And, ideally, if you could make kind of the perfect game, it would be 50. Right? I mean, you wouldn't want it to be anything other than 50 if you could choose. I don't think. There's some things in Magic that are counterintuitive in that way, where you actually wouldn't want a perfect mana system. They've made games like that. They suck. Right? So you may think logically, well, if you could just have everybody have perfect mana all the time, you would do that. You wouldn't. That would actually make Magic a lot worse. But I think game win rate on the play, I don't think that there's any benefit to the game by giving the person who won the die roll a win advantage. So I would assume, unless there's something I'm missing, that, they would want that to be as close to 50 as possible. And when I looked it up, if you look right now, there's 4 sets that are over 53% of the sort of main sets that we've had, not cube or anything like that. And, number one is MKM. It's the format that rewards you the most of all that have been on Arena, for being on the play. And the next one is Mom. And the next one is maybe like a tie between 1 and LCI. So there's 4 of these that are above 53%. Okay. And they're all in the last calendar year plus a few months. The next grouping, there's 1, 2, 3, there's 5 of them above 52%, and 2 more of them, WoW and LTR, fit in that same category. Now, the other 3 aren't. KHM, Mid, and KLR are also in this category, and they came out, between 1 to 3 years ago or whatever it is. But, that does mean that there's there's 9 that have been above 52%. And again, this is not desirable. You don't want it to be in that range. And all but 3 of those have come out in the last year and a half of sets. And to me, that is something that, you know, we can argue about, well, is it better if the set's faster? Is it more fun? Is it, you know, whatever, but we can't really argue about this. This is a problem to me that, you know, if I worked at Wizards, I'd say, whoa, this is going in the wrong direction. You know, this gap is getting further and further. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, Sierko, because I kind of went off on it, but I mean, you know, I want to get the big brain on it. And that's you.
We're big brain. Who big brain?
I was gonna. I had to say it was you.
Hulk will smash.
Is this concerning?
No. I don't want to be like scaremongering, but this is actually what I always seen as a big problem. Like because this, if you look at the graph that you see on the 17 lands for this format speed, there is always a linear link between speed of the format and win advantage on the play. Mm-hmm. And I think that this correlation has sort of broken down recently. Mm-hmm. And a set like MKM, looking at MKM speed, the advantage should be much lower, and it's not. Mm-hmm. Which indicates to me that there's some kind of intrinsic design kind of property of those sets that make those games so much more winnable when you're on the play. And the data that you see on 17 lands are player agnostic. So they look at both the 17 lens user and the non-17 lens user that they are playing against.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
That's why the average is 50% because, of course, the average win rate of both players will always be 50%. Mm-hmm. So that 53% win rate on the play means that, of course, it's 47% on the draw, which is like a big 6 percentage point split between when you start and when you don't.
Right.
And if you look only the 17 lens players, you still see this gap even bigger in some cases, and even more severe in some color combinations. So let's say, is it decks in this format? They have 58% win rate on the play and 49 on the draw. For the 17 lens users only, yeah?
Okay.
So there's almost like a 9 percentage point span between...
That's incredible.
Yeah,
Gruul, I mean, that's shocking, right? Like
Gruul 58% on the play, 48 on the draw, almost 10 percentage point span.
Oh man,
yeah. There are color combinations that are much lower. So Dimir has 53 on the play and 49 on the draw, so like 4 percentage point spread. So, but on the other hand, yeah, it only has 53% on the play, which is another problem on its own. But yeah, these are big differences, and I think that this is something that the Wizards should work really hard on, and that should be like a really priority for the design team to make sure that you don't get such a big advantage on the draw, especially that, you know, in best of 3, at least you will A, have a choice of being on the play on the draw, B, will at least play one game on the play, and maybe 2 on the draw. That's fine. You can spike one of those. You still have 40% of winning them. It's like a bad matchup in constructed, maybe. Mm-hmm. But in best of 1, that's what you get.
Totally.
You lost the die roll and 3 times, and all of a sudden your good deck that you drafted went 0-3 because you just got paired against really good Caravals, and you were on the draw 3 of the games. And yeah. I had feel bad moments in this format where I played a game and I said, I lost the game just now. There was not much I could have done about it. And I do know that if I won the coin flip, it would be the reverse. And my opponent would not be able to do anything, and I would have won it. And just the coin flip decided the outcome of this game. No impact of the player, no on either side. I mean, both of us played well, and one of us wouldn't have the chance because of the coin flip.
Yeah,
it does feel bad. And I think that there needs to be a lot of work put onto that. And honestly, there is still the correlation between the length of the game and the advantage on the play. So one simplest solution of tackling the problem is to try to put more focus on making the game slow down a bit, of making sure that those control decks can compete on equal footing. Because right now, they can compete, but it's still not a competition on equal footing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I looked up the traditional as well, just as a comparison, just to see if there is any big difference. And there's not. There's 6 that are above.
It's similar.
Yeah, there's 6 that are above 53%, and they are 1, WOE, LCI, MOM, MKM. So tell me if those sound familiar. Again, that's like the last 5 sets or whatever. And then KHM is also above it. So that, which is a little bit of an outlier because it came out a couple of years ago. But again, I mean, this is on traditional as well. So it doesn't, you'd hope that it would self-correct maybe a bit more. But it's similar enough. So yeah, so hopefully, that can be the thing, maybe the rallying cry to get a little bit more balance, or to get the runaway train under control. Because again, I think the thing that concerns me isn't just that these numbers exist, but that they are so concentrated on the last year and a half, and that it doesn't really feel like it's changing.
That's
right?
exactly what was worrying me, that there is a trend there, and the trend is scary. And I would like to go back maybe to the times of Kamigawa, Ikoria, Dominaria United, where it was around 51% advantage on the play, which is still some advantage. But those formats were not glacial. They were not super fast, but they were not glacial. But you were not sentenced to bad result if you are on the draw 3 times in a row. Yeah,
and my bigger picture point too isn't just that it's a feel bad if players are starting to have to pay such close attention to the die roll, right? Traditionally, I ignore the die roll. Obviously, I strategically approach my turns based on whether I'm on the play or the draw, but I've never been one of those people who's did I win? I just start processing right away about, well, what am I doing? And because it's out of my hands, right? That isn't something that I can control, but I know a lot of people that get pretty worked up. They'll come to you at a tournament and they'll be like, I lost 6 die rolls in a row. And it's I could never, ever tell you how many die rolls I won or lost in a tournament. Yes, of course I know it's important. I know it matters, but I just have completely put it out of my view just because it's not something that you can control anyway. And I feel like I'm going to become one of those people if the die rolls 53, 54%, plus if it's a 9, 7, 8, percent swing, I know how this stuff works, right? I used to, be a poker player. I was around casinos. I know that kind of swing is absolutely devastating. It is much bigger than, if I told you it's an 8% spread, you might be like, well, it's not so bad. It's no, over time, that is an unsurmountable, edge.
That's what is this? What is the spread between the people on the table and the casino in blackjack? It's 0.1%.
It's like a half. It's like a half to 1.5%. Right.
Yeah, that's enough to build golden toilets in every room.
Exactly. Have you ever seen Las Vegas? That was based off that.
Luckily not. I've seen it on the films, but luckily not in person.
I don't think it would suit you.
No, I don't.
But if you want to go, I'll take you. But I'm too chill for Vegas. But yeah.
But yeah, I think that for me, my personal tragedy with that. In Neon Dynasty, I made this sort of analysis where I could look at the composition of the deck, and based on which card are there and looking at their impact on game duration, I could calculate if this deck would like to be on the play or on the draw. And you could just input your deck list and you would figure out if you want to be on the play or on the draw. And in Kamigawa, around 13.5% of the decks wanted to actually be on the draw, which is not much. But 1 in 7 decks wanted to be actually on the draw. And then since then, I redid this analysis for other formats, and then just 0% of the decks wanted to be on the draw.
Interesting.
So sad. We need to go back, one time to have something like Guilds of Ravnica, where probably good 20% of the decks wanted to be on the draw.
Yeah,
because
totally.
of how they played.
Yeah, I mean, I think people would be surprised to learn that there was a point that you would sometimes voluntarily be on the draw in a game of limited, and it was actually correct to do so. That is something that if you started playing in the last few years is completely foreign to you. You would, look, we always took the play as the default. It was never that thing, but what Sierko said, 1 in 8 drafts, you might be like, you know what? this deck, or maybe it's game 2, right? And you're playing best of 3 and you're like, all right, these are 2 slow decks. I'd rather have the card. I'm going to be on the draw. Now that's just a way to lose a game. And to kind of bring the conversation full circle, this is the concern that I have. The 2 things that I keep thinking about are, one, the build around uncommons, the splashy rares, the decks that can do some really cool, interesting stuff are the ones that get pushed out. When the speed of the format speeds up, and also when the game win rate on the play, I think affects those type of things too, because you feel it in the game that, like, if you want to take a turn to spend 4 mana, but it doesn't attack or block, you feel it. You're like, oh boy, I'm out on a limb here. This could fall off the rails really easily if I'm not careful, or if I don't have just the right cards. And the other data point that keeps coming up for me too is when you talk to us, Sierkovitz, about, how much it affected your win rate to have a 1-drop, and particularly on the play, those swings were huge. And I think that if I were to narrow down one or 2 aspects that I guess are the reason that we see this game win rate on the play going up, it is because of the improvement of 1 mana creatures. They play roughly equivalent, slightly worse than most of the 2 mana creatures at common. And so you're kind of getting, the good 1-drops at common play like a 2-drop or close enough to it that you're getting a real bargain and putting yourself in a decent position to win just by simply playing 1. And then, what I said about the uncommons, the build arounds, the splashy rares, the slower decks and stuff like that. So those are the concerns that I have. I think that it's more like it makes you feel emotionally not great to know or to feel that the die roll has a much bigger impact on the game than you would assume it would. But I also think that there's strategies, cards, ideas, interesting things that get pushed out as well. And because I don't really care about the speed of the format as long as I can do interesting stuff within it. And I love limited because it is combat and creature focused. So these are not things that I'm against. And I think you can fit those into, whatever speed of format within reason that you want. But it is when, the scales get tipped so hard with 53, 54%, being on the play, that you start to really squeeze out the fringes of that stuff, of being able to do it. And unless you're in very specific scenarios, or everything kind of comes together perfectly or whatever. So any last thoughts on all that from you?
Yeah, I think that it's always better when the format has full range of strategies possible. Mm-hmm. And this one does. I mean, it's just that the
Simic deck helped a lot.
Simic deck, and to some extent, actually Blue-Red is slightly more mid-range than most people probably think. It's not like a strictly aggressive deck. It does much better in the mid to late game. It's just like worse version of Simic, and that's the problem that it has. Simic is just a slightly better combination. But still, in this format, it's just not like blue-black is the color combination that suffers, because there's just it cannot reliably make the game last long enough. Yeah. And if it makes the games last long enough, it actually has, a win rate. I'm not saying a great win rate, but
it's on the map.
Win rate.
Yeah, totally.
And it is the deck that manages to keep most of the games too long. Mm-hmm. So it is succeeding in the plan. It's just that it's not succeeding enough in that plan. It would need to be, like I talked in the last episode, it needs to have that extra half a turn in every game. And if you manage to get that, you're going to get a full diversity of the archetypes. Archetypes in the meaning of what type of strategy you can play, the aggro, mid-range, or control.
Right.
And all of them will be feasible. And look, I don't want to give stick to the design team again, because I can only imagine how difficult it is to pinpoint the speed of the format, which again goes back to the ridiculous idea that they design fast sets because they want people to play more games. Yeah. I don't think that it's possible to pinpoint what speed you want to have the format and deliver it. If they did, wow, would we live in the golden age of limited?
No kidding, because they wouldn't do it and they would just make it perfect.
But yeah, I guess I'm still happy playing this format. I actually like it quite a lot. I found that I can play diverse combinations of strategy as long as it contains green and usually a killer among us somehow. Please draft that card. Stop it. Stop it. Don't give it to me anymore. I want to play Is It once. Just once. So I'm going to continue playing until probably quite late because I'm not tired of it at all. I had like a one WoW draft as a break. It was fun. And I went straight back to MKM. I didn't continue with the WoW. A palate cleanser once in a while helps you. But then the next set is done by Dave Humphrey. So I'm quite optimistic about the future 3 months. Not in terms of my output at work, but about my output in terms of evening drafts. I'm quite confident it's going to be high.
Yeah, Humphreys has an incredible track record, and we'll see if he can deliver once again. Though he's kind of already, he's literally in the Hall of Fame, but he's also kind of in the Hall of Fame for designing limited sets. He's goated, as we say, in that way. So even if this one doesn't, I don't think it'll affect.
And and not super fast most of those sets because we have Ikoria, Kamigawa, and Kaldheim. All of them are on the slower side, and despite Kaldheim having like slightly larger on the play advantage.
Yeah,
and
but
Mum
those are
was
great
fast,
sets.
but fun.
Totally. And you can have both. So we'll hope and we'll keep an eye on it. Of course, it's just part of what we talk about here on the show, big picture stuff, all the way down to card level evaluations. We love limited here, and we always want to see it have a nice long runway ahead of us. And that's what we hope for from the next sets coming out. But yeah, it's always fun to dive in. Ciro, thanks so much for coming on, and thanks for the spirited discussion. This is awesome stuff. I love that we can dive in like this and really get into it, even in the middle of a crack-a-pack.
Yeah, I mean, sorry for that crack-a-pack. I completely forgot that we are on it. That's how tangential
I meant
went,
what I said.
In between, like multi-layer cake of arguments that build on each other. I know how great content it makes for when people have to have an appendix with the instructions of how did this thread appear.
No, it's good. I meant what I said.
That's what we got.
Yeah, no, I meant what I said, Ciro. I think that the crack-a-packs, especially at this stage of the format, are really great for starting discussions. And then in this case, we also want to hear how you approach the format. So we got to hear about that, about, the analyst and the different archetypes and stuff like that. Right before you took Novice Inspector with your Pack One, Pick One. But yeah, thanks again for coming on the show this week. We really appreciate it. Ciro, where can people find you if they want to catch up? If I'll put a link I'll just put a link to that thread in the show notes, so they'll find your Twitter via that.
That's my Twitter. That's my main operation ground. I do have a YouTube with YouTube Sierkovitz, where I put my weekly seminars. And I think that this is like the most important thing that I do, really. I mean, my weekly seminars, which are like the threads, but more in depth. I usually pick up different topic every week. Sometimes it's very experimental and I'm trying to figure out something new from the data. Sometimes it's like run of the mill. Okay, what's strong in this format? And sometimes I have a guest. Like this week I had Alex Korkols on my stream. We were talking about this re-review of the set to basically learn on our mistakes how to evaluate cards better. And I think that this is like the thing that gets lost with set reviews is that we review the sets and then those reviews go in the drawer, never to be refreshed. So instead of that, I never look at it. I never publish it initially. I only look at it when I want to draw lessons and maybe talk about why didn't I see that the Niv Mizzet is going to be good? Why did I overestimate black? Why did I underestimate green? And I can measure all those things and I can sort of like come to a conclusion. So yeah, this is the kind of stuff that you will find on my YouTube and my podcast, The Magic Numbers.
Oh, that is awesome, man. I'll put a link to your YouTube and that thread that we talked about, which will get them to your Twitter as well. So thanks again, Ciro, for coming on and staying up late with us. I really appreciate it. We want to say thanks to everybody on our Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. Thanks to Ultimate Guard for supporting us. Make sure you check out their site at ultimateguard.com, or you can pick up their products from your favorite LGS or online retailer. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR. Again, I'm going to have Ciro's Twitter. And if you want to follow Luis for some weird reason, it's LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week. Ciro, we forgot to come up with a sign off.
I think I have one.
What do you got?
How about like old school tournaments and how different they were from the modern
Bring
era?
It. Do it.
So, and the day that I was playing more competitively and, like going to GPs and on the circuit and PTQs and PT, whatever, I was a 18-year-old from Poland with no fixed income. So we traveled in a very special way. So, for example, we all went to the World Championship in Brussels. I don't remember exactly which year it was, but it was like 2000 or 2001.
Uh-huh.
And we didn't book any hotel because we couldn't afford it. So we just took our backpacks and sleeping bags. And the site at that time was open 24/7. So we were like jamming night tournaments. And then like around 4 a.m. when those tournaments stopped, we just like crashed somewhere on site on the carpet in the sleeping bag.
Are
with our
you
collection
serious?
inside of the sleeping bag so no one nicks it and just sleeping on the side. Just to give you the impression, one night on that tournament, I brought like a big bottle of gin with me from Poland. And I bought like a big bottle of tonic in the local supermarket or something. I had 2 glasses in front of me. I played an 8-round seal tournament, which was like some kind of low stakes things. It was more for fun. Before every round, I was offering my opponent a gin and tonic, and and 4 of them accepted. So we had like gin tonics during the game, and we were chilling and having gin tonic during the game. After that tournament, finished around 4 a.m. and I couldn't find this good spot to sleep because it was crowded and whatnot. So I basically crawled under the feature match area and just like fell asleep there. And it was 4 a.m. I didn't wake up very, very briskly. So how I woke up was John Finkel kicking me out from under the table because he was supposed to start his quarterfinal of the World Championship.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
So I'm just like waking up and just crawling out, dragging my sleeping bag. So that
by the way, he won.
He won that one. Yeah,
it was in 2000.
And it was an amazing display of play. So maybe I'm not saying I contributed to that, but maybe I brought this anger in him initially in the quarterfinals that carried him to win the World Championship title.
Wow, the story that was never told. Sierkovitz inspired Finkel to win the 2000 World Championship.
That's probably how I began the sort of content creator influencer life. Like first, John Finkel learned how to be angry by kicking me out from under the table.
Incredible.
Now I'm here.
Wow.